Hi, my name is Nick Harmer, lead developer for Drop Everything Games, and this is how I would have rebuilt the worst level in Ori and the Blind Forest. Now, I don't want to start off on the wrong foot. Of my top 5 favorite games, Ori is number 3. It is an incredible game, a Metroidvania, specifically a Metroidvania with beautiful vistas, powerful music, and nearly perfect gameplay. But there are those who have complaints as well. It was poorly received by several media outlets, largely because of a few very punishing sections. And it is one of these sections that I need to investigate today, the Forlorn Ruins. A relentless frozen catacomb which, despite the overarching good level design through the rest of the game, is just plain annoying. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's first look at what Ori does right. I mean, it has the best 2D level design that I've ever played. The kind of high quality level design that deserves to be studied. And the best of these levels is the Ginso tree. So here's a quick rundown of the Ginso tree. In the first third of the tree, you're tested on your skill with previously awarded abilities. In the second third, it teaches you a new ability. In the final third, it tests your mastery of the new skill. For more on this, check out Game Maker's Toolkit episode on Ori and the Blind Forest, linked in the description. But for us, I want to highlight a few key features of the Ginso tree. 1. It is a level that considers its place in the game as a whole by properly testing the player's old skills and abilities, and introducing a new ability that is fun, inventive, and changes the power balance of the game. 2. It functions properly as a set piece, meaning that it has a place in the world. It is a tree from which the waters flow, which has been poisoned, and it plays its role. It is a vertical space, which makes sense in the world. 3. It is properly designed around the ability that it teaches. The first third of the tree begs for the mechanic. It would be so much easier if you had just had the bash ability to get through it. And then as you come into the second third, it grants the ability and it shows you everything that you can do with it. The shape of the level additionally shows the strength of this new ability. It gives you great vertical mobility and allows you to explore that space. So by comparison, here's how the Forlorn Ruins work. Rather than being tested on previous mechanics as you start here, you're introduced to the story element, which has not been foreshadowed properly, by the way, and then immediately you pick up this orb. The orb is, in my opinion, the greatest defender in this dungeon, because unlike the ability that you learn in the Ginso tree, which changed the playing field and gave you lots of power in the game, this orb is subtractive. It limits you. You can't use any of your powerful mobility moves, and carrying the orb makes you walk slowly, so right out of the gate, we're forced to play Ori Light. You then find that the orb protects you from hot stuff. Also, why is there hot stuff in here if there are a bunch of frozen bodies at the door? And it makes you stick to walls. It slowly teaches that the sticking to walls mechanic actually changes your relationship with gravity and gives you progressively harder puzzles using this ability. Also, during this section, you have limited space in which you can save. And the level design is such that you can only really work through sections by having died there before. This means that from a story standpoint, you're able to overcome obstacles only because they've killed you previously, meaning that somehow Ori is retaining knowledge of past lives and applying that. This kind of anachronistic learning is prevalent throughout the dungeon. So finally, you take the orb to the altar, and it turns on the AC in an already frozen ruins. Also during this section, a previous enemy that Ori showed mercy to wanders into the ruins and learns that Ori is trying to honor the memory of his fallen kin. Either way, the drafts are created by replacing the orb, so you can finally pull out your feather and make full use of its mobility. You then, with no recent practice with a feather and none with a feather in the wind, are put into a challenge section like the end of the Ginso tree, but rather than having expanded your understanding of the mechanic, remember you're carrying the handicap orb, you're forced to learn the minutiae of the mechanic on the fly, pun intended. Once you finally Groundhog Day your way through this section, you suddenly come upon the nest of Kuro, the demon owl that has been hunting you since the Ginso tree. There you learn why she hates you, and you gain compassion for her. She finds you among the dead bodies of her children and immediately tries to eradicate you. Then you play a game of cat and mouse with Kuro, which is really quite good. It uses all of your abilities and builds out the tension between Ori and the owl. It is absolutely incredible. So here are the main issues of this section. 1, it does not respect the player's desire for growth. The primary reason that games are fun is that they provide ample feedback while increasing the skill of their players. This tight and directioned learning is the joy of games. In the Forlorn Ruins, however, the player is limited. They can't practice their previous abilities, and they will never use the mechanic of the orb again. 2. It does not deliver on the set-piece promise of the first dungeon, namely that dungeons in this game feel like real places with natural-feeling puzzles. Like the tree went straight up and the mechanics and gameplay supported that action. Or in other words, it doesn't feel like a real place because there's not a story reason to stick through walls and then fly through the air. So, based on what the Ginso tree taught us, a dungeon would optimally do these 3 things. 1. Give us a sense of attaining mastery of mechanics, not only anachronistic knowledge. 2. Teach us mechanics that mean something for the rest of the game. 3. Reveal more of the story and make that story felt in the direction and the mode of the map. And with that in mind, what can we do to fix the Forlorn Ruins? Let's assume that we're working as level designers for Moon Studios and that 1. The dungeon must support the mechanic. This is a core feature of Ori and the Blind Forest, and part of what made the first dungeon so successful. 2. We cannot change the mechanic, because we are assuming A. that the mechanic was tested to be fun on its own, and that Moon Studios did their work on this. And that B. since the dungeon's mechanic is subtractive, there's something about the subtractive nature of this mechanic that Moon Studios wants to preserve. Having a subtractive mechanic can be incredibly powerful if it's used correctly. It can teach you who this character really is, and we'll attempt to replicate that as we rework this level. 3. The walk-on malls mechanic will never be used outside of this dungeon. So what we should do as we work through it is find things that we can teach that will be used outside of the dungeon. 4. The dungeon still needs to carry all of the story weight that it did previously. We need to make sure that we have all of that Gumo stuff in there and that the Kuro piece at the end is set up properly. As an addendum to that, we need to make sure that the set piece still feels abandoned and hollow, as it does in the shipped version of the game. If we violate this feeling, we run the risk of taking away from the story instead of adding to it, and not properly setting up for the pieces that come later. Okay, so with all that set up, we can start to redesign this area. And the first thing that I think needs to be changed is the general shape of the dungeon. Right now, it looks kind of like this, with the player's path of play coming through looking something like this. It looks kind of like one long esophagus with a single twist. Let's change the overall shape to make this area feel more like a natural set of ruins. I mean, if the Gumo were really technologically advanced, as the story says, then they would have designed this place to do things specifically, and for that purpose, I'm going to start with this inverted pyramid shape, which both feels like an intentional designed shape and also tells a bit of story just in its shape. Then we should think of how the play will flow through the area. I think it's fine for this purpose to backtrack quite a bit, so long as it does this within the architecture of the Gumo. I see a few different entryways up top being vital, followed by a larger open work area. This pit will have 2 different puzzles, which interlock with each other. When that area is finished, there will be one final entryway into the reactor area. This is the place where the winds will be furnished. From there, Ori will escape through this vent, which will drop him out onto Kuro's nest. From there, the gameplay will play out exactly as in the shipped version. So we have the shape of the level, and we have its designed direction of play. Now let's place the specific challenges. In the 3 entry rooms up top, we should test the player's knowledge of previous game mechanics. Let's say that 2 of these have collapsed in decay, and that they will only serve as places to gain key runes. Key runes are a form of lock and key mechanism where you have to collect a certain number. And after a basic skills check, we can introduce the main mechanic of this dungeon. This way we've gone through, we've allowed the player to express themselves, and then add the constraint afterward. So when the player passes through the key rune lock, there will be these rotating semicircles. This will come back later. After navigating into one of these locks, the player will find the orb. They will pick up the orb and climb back out of the semicircle lock and use the orb to safely walk across a damaged floor, which will curve ever so slightly, hinting at the stick-to-the-walls mechanic, also preventing the player from trying to jump and fly through the entirety of this section. The orb will be placed in a container of sorts here, and carried into the next section on its own. As the player enters this next section, the camera will sweep down into the ruins proper, showing off the empty and forlorn space. The player must then navigate their way through this rather open area by first walking down the wall. Some things we need to keep in mind for this section are that the player now has the ability to climb, double jump, bash, and float with Kuro's feather, meaning that we have to keep in mind the player's enhanced mobility. This is where the semicircle locks come in. If we make them out of the damaged material, then the only way to safely enter will be to adhere to the surface using the orb and pass through the lock. This means that despite the mobility of the player, if they want to pass into these locks, they will have to enter using the cling to walls / change gravity mechanic. Additional thing I should mention is that you can only pick up the orb or drop the orb on safe surfaces. You can't do this in the air. If we make this section about 2 separate puzzles, one in which the player is allowed to use all of their mobility mechanics, and then have them work backward through that area using the orb, it will show them the power of the orb and allow them to feel the strength of it while still expressing themselves through the moveset. This also allows us to make the area safer than the area in the ship version. Rather than having to place spikes to keep the player from using their abilities and punishing them by killing them, we have platforming sections where the only cost for failure is a reset. So now that we've taken the frustration out of the mechanic, we can use the same wall clinging puzzles that were used in the shipped version, and the gameplay will be more positive rather than negative. Finally, when this section is finished, we will power an elevator of sorts instead, which will take us directly to the element of the winds. Because we have encouraged continual practice with the feather, this section will not feel out of place. But if we use just the shipped version of the flight with the feather, then we still run the risk of creating the feeling of playing anachronistically. I think the best solution in this case is to leave most of the level intact because it's a nice callback to the Ginso tree, and instead try better to telegraph the next danger. This will allow the player to play more reactively rather than needing previous knowledge and memorizing where the obstacles are. The section where Ori hides from Kuro is great and needs no more help. So by restructuring the first section where Ori is exploring the ruins to look and feel more like a ruins, and allowing the player to expand their understanding of the current moveset, we fixed the main issues of the Forlorn Ruins. In reality, the ruins, as was shipped, does a pretty good job of communicating the story. But if we did a better job fitting it into the flow of the game, into teaching mechanics and expanding the player's knowledge base, and if we had greater respect for the promises established in the Ginso tree, promises of good, natural level design, then it might not be the worst part of this really good game. And hopefully, when Moon Studios releases Will of the Wisps, it will all be like the Ginso tree. Hey guys, thank you for watching the video. This one was created specifically because someone asked me what it would be like if I designed a level. So I kind of went through that, or rather if I redesigned a level. So I went through that process here and it was fun and enjoyable, and I hope that you guys enjoyed it as well. If you did, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe, and I will see you guys. I should have a new video out sometime next week. So have a good day. Bye.